thanks very much for coming out tonight. I think there'll probably be a few people who join us, but we'll make a bit of a start. My name's Kelly Heffer. I work in the sustainability team here at Glen Eira Council. And I'd firstly like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Bunurong, Bunurong and Wurundjeri Wurrung people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So we're really pleased to be able to partner on this event tonight with the Glen Eira Emergency Climate Action Network, or GECAN, for some of you who might have heard of them before. So you may be aware that it's going back 3 years now that Glen Eira declared that we're in a climate emergency, joining a really massively growing movement these days, where I happen to do a little check this morning, and there's 2,339 jurisdictions who've now declared a climate emergency across 40 countries globally, so they tend to be local governments and state governments, and that's really acknowledging the urgent and strong climate action that's needed to address climate change and the challenges we face. So as a council, while driving down carbon emissions and adapting to climate change impacts are a key part of our strategy, and we adopted a climate emergency response strategy 2 years ago. So too is supporting the community to really understand and come to terms with the climate crisis that we face, and even more importantly is then supporting people to take climate action in all their different forms, and we'll hear about that tonight. So in that context, when GECAN came to us with the idea of doing exactly this session, I was super keen to support it and find a way of partnering to make that happen tonight. So I'll provide a bit of an overview about how tonight will run, but just some housekeeping right from the top, boring things about phones spinning off, please. And we won't break through the session, we just have an hour and a half together, but if you really needed the toilets, you might have seen them on the way in. They're just straight opposite, near the lifts. And so we'll have our main speaker, Professor Ann Sanson from University of Melbourne, present on our topic, how to talk with children and teens about the climate emergency. We'll then invite 3 young people that we're really thrilled to have with us that live in our local region, and they'll be sharing their perspectives in a conversation with Anne, so we'll have that up the front, and then it'll be over to you for your questions at the end, and we'll have Rick from GECAN afterwards sharing some information about GECAN and how you can get involved. And we'd really love it if you want to stay around at the end, have a chat, loads of information outside, and you can have a cuppa. It's sort of like council's got this wonderful theatre, but you can't actually bring your popcorn in, so we'll meet out the back for some snacks and drinks after, if you would like. So we have Bruce from GECAN filming, and we plan to just film the main presentation and then the discussion here on stage, and we'll share that through GECAN's networks and for people who registered and may not have been able to make it tonight. We don't intend to use the audience Q&A, so you can feel free to ask your questions during that part of the night. And I'll take a few photos, mainly just to capture the spirit of the night. So I'll hand over to Sally from GECAN to introduce Anne, but firstly, make a couple of remarks herself. Thanks a lot, Sally.
Lovely that you all come today, thank you. We've got lots of different groups represented one way or another, and that's the beauty of this amazing topic. It's the challenge of Australia and life, I think. So we've got Extinction Rebellion, which I'm part of, as well as being part of the local council affiliated one. So it's really good when you have climate choir people like Anne and I are both in the climate choir. There's something that any person can do. You just find your group and your people, and you find you can do some good things that offset a lot of the anxiety. So there is a little slip on the table, lots of good information out there from different people in the council, Extinction Rebellion and Anne's own brochure. So just remember that that's on the way out. If you haven't got time, hopefully you will for a bit of a coffee and chat, but just please do take one because there's something there for whatever level of involvement, whatever interest you've got. So having Ann here is a real honour, even though she's an honorary professor herself. We know that her main research has been focusing on understanding the role of the child, the family and the community, the sort of development and well-being of children. We can't imagine it happening these days without taking into account this big topic that we're all living under. So for the last 10 years, her work has focused on the impact of the climate crisis on current and future generations of children. So we're very glad that parents, teachers and communities can best support them with knowledge of people and study that people like Ann have done. So I welcome you, Ann. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Sally, and thanks, Kelly, too, both of you for organising, and others too for organising tonight. It's really lovely to have a chance to talk to you. Now hopefully we'll go straight to my slide. There we are, isn't it magic? So as Sally said, I should tell you a little bit about myself to begin with, I guess. As Sally said, I'm a developmental psychologist by training, so my main career has been looking at how families, schools, communities can best support kids to grow up to be able to live well, love well, play well and work well, which is more or less Freud's definition of well-being. In other words, to be, happy, healthy and productive adults. And I did that for many years. But then as I became more aware of the climate crisis, I really thought, well, what are the conditions for kids to grow up, to be happy, healthy and productive? The one basic condition, of course, is having somewhere where they can live healthily and happily. And as I recognised the severity of the climate crisis, I thought, well, if I'm not handing on a livable planet to the next generation, there's actually not very much point to all the things that I've been doing about tweaking around the edges to support kids. If they don't have the basic ingredient of a healthy planet, we won't, they're going to be having a really tough time. So that's why I took early retirement and started focusing on this sort of topic. And I suppose one of the first things I did when I retired was to join Darebin Climate Action Now, which by that time had already done the amazing thing of persuading our council, the City of Darebin, to be the first council in the world to declare a climate emergency, with Glen Eira now joining the ranks, which is fantastic. So as Kelly said, 2,000 plus other municipalities have done the same now. And we continue to try to work with our local council and at local government and at state and federal levels to try to persuade our decision makers to do the right thing about the emergency and act on it as if it's an emergency. I guess my work has also been trying to persuade my colleagues at the university, and particularly in psychology, to really take this seriously. So one of the things I've more recently been involved in is starting this new group called Developmental Scientists for Climate Action, which is basically anybody who's concerned about the human development impacts of climate change anywhere along the lifespan. And that's been lots of fun, with people from every continent now involved and coming up with a whole lot of projects with a strong focus on youth in the work that we're doing, but not exclusively that. So that's sort of the way that my late bit of my career has sort of developed and what I've been trying to do. But let's move on. I want to, we all remember that this is the only emergency that we've been facing recently. It's interesting thinking back to the start of the COVID pandemic and how we were told that if we washed our hands and kept 1.5 metres away from each other, everything would be fine. And then we discovered it was somewhat more complicated than that, and that the recession and the lockdowns and so on, their impacts were perhaps even greater than the pandemic itself. But I think if we look at it a bit more broadly, we can see that climate change and the collapse of biodiversity that's accompanying it are in fact far more huge challenges to us. We are learning how to live with COVID. We can't live with runaway climate change, and if we ignore it and don't act with urgency, then we really are facing catastrophe from the sort of tsunami of impacts from So I'm sure with this audience, I really don't need to remind us that even with only 1.2 degrees of warming so far, the Earth is already too hot. We all know about the, awful coastal inundation, the islands in the Pacific that are already going underwater, the flooding in many places. We know about our own fires in 2019 and 20, and the awful fires that have been now happening over the northern summer, although also in Latin America during their winter. And I think, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm now facing our coming summer and the one after this one with dread. I remember how I used to really hanker for summer to arrive, and time of freedom and lazing around in the sun, and now I really face it with a sense of dread. And we also know that there are millions of people who are already having to leave their homes because where they live has become too hot, too dry, too uninhabitable, and desperately seeking somewhere else that will welcome them for trying to start a new life. So I think we know all these events are happening with greater intensity, greater frequency. So we really are already at the start of catastrophic climate change, and as the scientists tell us, we've really only got this decade to bring down those emissions to zero in order to try to achieve or save a livable planet. I'm not going to show you many graphs, but this one I think is quite a useful one. It was on modelling that was done in 2019, and it shows how if we'd started, if we'd started in the year 2000 to seriously start drawing down emissions, we could have had quite a slow transition period to a net zero, to a zero carbon economy. But in 2019, when this graph was done, in order to stay below 1.5 degrees, the sort of safe-ish zone, it needed to be an amazingly fast transition. We've now delayed another 4 years, so if we looked at 2023, this is the speed in which we have to make change on so many fronts. It really is an amazing task that's facing us, and where we need to persuade our governments that they are brave enough and capable enough to lead us in it. So let's then move to kids. Let's start off with what happens when kids are exposed to an extreme weather event due to climate change. Well, obviously, there are multiple impacts on physical health. Kids are more vulnerable to disasters than adults are, to deaths and injuries and infectious diseases of all sorts that are all become prevalent with climate events. Malnutrition and diarrheal diseases are all already big killers of kids, particularly in the majority world, the developing world, and will come into play after disasters. And then, of course, there are also the psychological impacts. So we know that rates of post-traumatic stress go up markedly when a kid is caught in a fire or a hurricane or a flood or whatever. Similarly, rates of anxiety and depression go way up. Many kids have sleep problems, so they find it difficult getting to sleep, staying asleep, they have nightmares. And many experience learning problems, partly because of just the level of stress that they're under. It's really hard to concentrate. Also in some parts of the world, because schools are destroyed and it takes a long time to get them back, so that interruption in their learning has long-term effects. And many kids feel helpless and hopeless of not feeling like there's anything they can do about the situation they're in. But of course, how severe those symptoms are really depends on what sort of exposure they've had to the event. And the good news is that most kids show amazing resiliency and usually recover from those initial symptoms quite quickly if they're exposed just to a single disaster. And things like if they've been separated from their parents, if they get back together with them quickly, if parents are able to still give them stable and sensitive caregiving, which is no mean task if you're living in chaos after an event, but many parents manage still to do that. If you can return to your routines quickly, like getting back to school, or if schools have been destroyed, then creation of child-friendly spaces where kids can go and be safe and have some structure to their lives, enough social support and so on and so forth. All of those feed into the resiliency of kids after being exposed to a disaster. But their vulnerability increases if their exposure is severe, if they've been injured themselves, if they've seen other people being injured or killed, if they've been separated from family, if their homes have been destroyed, if it's prolonged, goes on for a long time, or if it's repeated. And what we know about that so far is that if a kid has been through a bushfire, for example, and another fire is upon them, they don't say, oh, here's another fire, I know what to do about that, everything will be fine, but rather they're re-traumatised, their symptoms are exaggerated further. And of course, if these events occur frequently, it doesn't really give time for all the support systems around a child to recover entirely, in terms of the family, in terms of communities, schools, education systems, health systems. And the really worrying thing is that this repeated exposure is the likely scenario for many kids. So this is the last graph I'm going to show, and it comes from Save the Children based on modelling done by Theory and colleagues. And they compared somebody who was born in 1960 to somebody who was born in 2020 in terms of their likelihood of them being exposed to a whole lot of climate-related events like fire, like crop failures through flood or drought, extreme drought and heat, floods, heat waves, etc. And they found for all of these events, the likelihood of a kid born in 2020 to be exposed was very much higher. And if you add all of those together, you come up to 24 times as likely. So somebody born in 1960 might have expected to experience 1 or 2 climate-related extreme weather events in their lives. Somebody born in the year 2020 can expect somewhere between 24 and 48 such events. It's getting close to 1 every 2 or 3 years. And of course that's worse in some parts of the world than in others. Although Australia is at high risk from climate change, we also have the infrastructure to better prevent, prepare for and recover from disasters than other parts of the world that are both very vulnerable to climate change and have got far less weaker infrastructure. And that of course is where the majority of the world's children live. So I think taking that global worldview is very important. But then, of course, there's another level of impacts, and these are the ones that we're probably much more familiar with where we are now. Most of our kids here in Melbourne, in Australia, haven't yet experienced severe climate-related disasters. But we have surveys from all around the world now that show that most kids know about climate change and are worried about its effects. So they express fear, anxiety and worry, distress, grief, a sense of loss, the loss of the future they thought they were going to have, or the loss of beloved places. I've just experienced that sense of loss, what's called nostalgia myself. I've had the privilege of going trekking in the Larapinta Trail in the West MacDonald Ranges out of Alice Springs with an Aboriginal guides, which was a wonderful experience in many ways. But I was there 25 years before, and then there was birdsong all around us. I was keeping track of the birds. I got up to 25 species in the first couple of, 50 species, sorry, in the first couple of days. There were insects everywhere, there were reptiles everywhere. This time it was silent, and we got excited if we saw one lizard in the day. And that is partly due to climate change, and it's also due to this invasion of this horrible buffel grass that's come through all of that area and is smothering everything else. And the interesting thing, of course, was the younger people on the trek didn't experience that because they didn't know what it was that they were missing. So it's that intergenerational amnesia. And so that sort of sense of loss is called nostalgia. Sorry, that was a bit of a sidetrack. Getting back to kids now, a lot of kids express anger and frustration with our generations for having created this problem and doing so little to deal with it. I always feel very confronted when I look at the graphs of the increase in carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse emissions over time and see how virtually all of it has happened over my lifetime. since the Second World War, and with the squanderous, luxurious, consumerist lifestyles that we've all been encouraged to adopt over that period of time. So their anger is quite reasonable. And then many express helplessness, despair and hopelessness. So probably our most authoritative data on this to date comes from a study by Carolyn Hickman and her colleagues. It came out a couple of years ago, where they surveyed 10,000 kids across 10 countries. They were both in the global south and the global north, including Australia. And what they found was that 60% said they were very or extremely worried about climate change. Hardly any were not at all worried, so most of the rest were moderately or mildly worried. But 60% were very or extremely worried. Same sort of percent felt betrayed by their government's inaction. Same sort of percent felt that humanity is doomed. They were not confident that we were going to get on top of this, which is pretty scary. So the authors concluded that the psychological, emotional, cognitive, social and functional burdens of climate change are profoundly affecting huge numbers of young people around the world already. So when we're confronted with data like this, it really makes me feel like we as parents and grandparents and as teachers, any of us who've got responsibility for the next generation, are really facing an unprecedented situation, because we have to deal with our own anxieties and worries about all of this at the same time as nurturing our kids to help them cope with what is looking at like a fairly scary future. So what then can we do about it? Well, there are four main messages that I think are critical ones for us when we're thinking about how to support our kids. And they're all fairly self-evident, but I think they're all really important. And the first, of course, is to listen and respond to their feelings and their concerns. Not all kids feel comfortable talking about climate change with their parents or with other adults. They either don't have the words for it, they feel it's not cool to show that you care, they don't want to add, they know that their parents are worried, they don't want to add to their burdens, all sorts of reasons why they may not actually bring it up themselves spontaneously. So it's really important for us to create times and places where they do feel comfortable to talk about their feelings. So it might be, you know, when you're comfortably sitting around the telly and there's a news item and about the latest disaster, to say, you know, how do you feel when things like this come up on the news, and to start to explore those, and not judging or dismissing those feelings. Avoiding the temptation to say, oh, don't worry about it, dear, everything will be all right. But recognise their feelings as valid. To say, yes, I can understand why you're worried. It is a big problem, I'm worried about it too. Or I can understand why you're worried about my generation for having got us into this mess. We really need to be working harder to fix it. What ideas do you have? But in that process of listening for emotions and validating them, and supporting kids with them, it's important to pair those messages with what I call realistic hope and efficacy, that I'll come to in a second. The second big thing is building their understanding. So I think we've probably all experienced the temptation of trying to shield our kids from the truth of what climate change implies for the future. But I think that's not possible. That cat is really out of the bag. It's in almost every news bulletin you come across now. So kids, and the surveys show that most kids do know about it and are worried already. So, and because it's going to have such a big impact on their future, it wouldn't be fair to try to keep these truths from them. So it seems to me our responsibility is to help kids to cope with the knowing about what climate change means. Which means we need to ask them questions. What have you learnt about climate change at school? What do you know about things? Respond to their questions. And if you don't know the answers, it's a great opportunity to sit down and say, oh, let's do some research on this, let's find out what the situation is about this or that fact. So I think our role is to help build their knowledge about climate change, but not just the horrible things that it might imply for the future, but more importantly about its causes in human behaviour, and even more importantly about solutions, the things we can do about it. Okay, so the third thing is a really important one, and that's building kids' sense of hope. And it's not the Pollyanna-ish, everything will be all right, dear, sort of hope, but rather what I and my colleagues tend to call realistic hope, other people call active hope, which means recognising, yes, it is a huge and urgent problem, but we do really know what needs to be done. We know we need to get carbon emissions down to zero. We've got to stop using fossil fuels. We need to change our modes of transport, our modes of agriculture. We need to draw down the excess already there. Nearly all of that we know basically what needs to be done. And remind them that lots of good people are working on it, not only the scientists and the engineers who are working on solutions, but also all of the people who are working really hard to persuade governments and corporations and so on to do the right thing. It's a good time to remind kids about the big problems that humanity has solved before, to have conversations about apartheid and the collapse of apartheid, to have conversations about the civil rights movement, about women's vote, about, the overthrow of President Marcos through people power. All these examples we can think of where there are big problems which we solved, and point out how each of those were resolved because hundreds and thousands and millions of people demanded action from their governments and the others in authority. So building this sense of efficacy, of collective efficacy, together we can make a difference. And the fourth really important one is building kids and young people's capacity to take action, because I've become more and more convinced that the best antidote to any form of anxiety, whatever we're anxious about, we feel better if we start to do something about the cause of it. That's even more the case, I think, with climate anxiety, climate distress. Which means we each need to be good role models of taking action and explaining our reasons. Probably all of us here do good things for the environment every day, but we don't always make it explicit to our kids what we're doing. I'm catching the train rather than using my car because, and you know what all the reasons are. I'm not wrapping your lunch in plastic anymore because I'm writing to my MP because, whatever it is. It's important also to treat kids not just as victims of the climate catastrophe, but also as problem solvers with a right to be involved. What can we do as a household to reduce our carbon footprint? How can we persuade the supermarket not to wrap everything up in plastic? What can we do to get solar panels on your school faster? Involve them in that thinking and problem solving. And another thing is not to treat kids just as consumers, but also as citizens. And that applies to us as well, to think of ourselves not just as consumers, but also as citizens. So it's really important that we do all these things in our own lifestyle, to reduce our amount of air travel, to reduce the amount of meat we eat, to not use plastics, to think about our purchasing all the time, all those, and to put on our solar panels and get our induction stoves, etc. All of those are really important, but they're never going to be enough. We also need to act as citizens, and kids know that that's the case too. So building kids' capacity for active citizenship, which means knowing how to responsibly, non-violently and effectively influence decision makers, whether you're thinking of the manager of the supermarket, or you're thinking about your local MP, or you're thinking about the Prime Minister or the CEO of Santos. How you can, as a citizen, you can have an impact. And then, because this is really hard stuff to do on your own, it's really important that we show kids how joining up with others who are also passionate about this is not only more fun, you also learn a lot more, and you can have a much greater impact. And as I was thinking about this morning, I also realised that I probably ought to add a number 5 to this. And the number 5 is taking time out and having fun, especially in nature. So some of you, I don't know where your kids are on this, but some kids get so passionate about this, some of us ourselves get so passionate about this, that it's very hard to find time to relax, to to really embed yourself in this world that we're trying so hard to save and to enjoy it. So I think another thing that's really important is if your kid is really engaged in this, to also make sure that they have times to unwind, to relax, and particularly to be in nature, because we know that having times in nature is good for both our physical and our mental health. So I think I should add that as number 5 at some point. But these 4 of listening for feelings, building understanding, building hope, this active hope, and building the capacity for action are 4 really critical things. And of course these things, this was like that, how we do these things depends on the ages of our kids. Can I just ask, how many of you have kids of primary school age or less? Quite a few. And how many have kids of high school age and above? Quite a few of you, yes. Okay, so obviously the way we talk to our kids, the sorts of activities we engage with vary by age, not only by age, but also according to kids' personality and interests and passions. But in talking to kids about climate change, obviously our aim is not to scare them, but to acknowledge that they probably already know enough to be worried, and if they don't now, they soon will, and it's much better for them to hear about this from a trusted and loving person than it is from getting it from the social media or from somebody down the street. So with really little kids, obviously we keep our explanations simple and often in response to questions or in the context of an activity. Mummy, why is it so smoky outside? Well, it's because there are big fires out there to the east because the temperature's getting hotter with climate change. So it's quite scary, isn't it? Shall we send some money to the people who've lost their houses? Simple questions, simple answers. Or in the context of an activity, why are you planting those trees? Well, trees are really good because they take carbon dioxide from the air and they put it into the ground. And we've got too much carbon dioxide because we all are using our cars too much and using oil and so on. So simple explanations. Modelling is really important with little kids. It's really important they see you doing the right things. And again, as I said before, explaining it. So I'm taking the train to work because I'm not buying so much food, but so much meat for us, red meat for us, because whatever it is. And it's also important to set high expectations for our kids' pro-environmental behaviour. In this house, we walk or ride our bikes or take public transport whenever we can rather than using our car. In this house, we turn the lights off when we leave the room. In this house, we set our thermostats, low in winter and high in summer. Whatever it is, and have those expectations for them. In this house, we try not to waste food, and when there is waste food, it goes to the worms in the compost heap. So that's really important for building pro-environmental behaviour. And then going back to what I was saying before about nature, it's really important to give kids lots of time to be relaxed and happy in natural environments, because we know that kids need to be there in nature, watching the birds, watching the ants, playing mud pies, whatever it is, being in nature, feeling comfortable in nature, in order to feel like they're connected to nature, they're part of nature, and that then makes them motivated to work to protect the natural environment, to work for nature. So what I usually say when talking to parents about little kids is it's a good idea to focus activities around nature and environmental protection, like creating a veggie garden and explaining why, or an Indigenous garden, helping to regenerate the local creek or planting trees in the local park, and using all the senses, and focusing on these small, fairly local actions. But when I've given this talk, when there have been little kids in the audience, at this point they tend to jump up and say, no, that's not right, we know that's not enough, we want to get involved in bigger stuff. So some kids, even little kids, 6 and 8-year-olds, are going to want to do something more. So if they are wanting to do more, of course you accept and encourage that and support them in doing bigger activities. Attending rallies together. We haven't had so many post-pandemic, but that's often a really lovely family activity, assuming you choose ones that are you're not going to be non-violent. This is an age where kids are highly creative, take advantage of that, help them to make posters that they can put on the front fence, help them to create plays about the koalas or the polar bears or whatever, sing songs that have got climate themes and so on. And then for older kids, all of those same things apply that I've just said, but of course they often know a lot, sometimes they know more than we do, and they do want to be listened to. So taking their ideas seriously is really critical, very collaborative conversations. Obviously they can understand more complex explanations, they can see how what we do at a local level affects the global context, they can also see how what's happening in the global phenomenon of climate change is impacting on their local environment. They can see how what happened in the past has created the situation that we're here in the present, and they can also see how actions that we take now are going to impact on the future. Kids of this age tend to be very concerned about issues of fairness and justice. How often do your kids say, "It's not fair, Mum, it's not fair, Dad"? So kids often are really concerned about how people in the majority world, the developing world, did much less to create climate change but are going to suffer worse. They're deeply concerned about the unfairness that future generations that didn't create the problem will suffer because of it. They're deeply concerned about the impacts on the natural environment. So all of these are bigger than self-values, aren't they? They're ones that they're not just focused on my career or my friendship group or getting a good house or whatever. They're bigger than self-values, and they're really important ones. So when your kid does say any of these things, I think it's really important to say, "I'm really proud of you for feeling that way. That's a really important thing. What can we do about it? Let's think of something we can do about that." They're also very sensitive to hypocrisy, so it's even more important that we're good models and we practice what we preach. They also are much more aware than younger kids of the issue that I just raised before, that small local activities are not going to be enough. They need also to be involved in bigger things. So finding things where they can be having a larger impact on the problem of emissions and of climate is really important. They're peer-oriented, so help them to engage with others who feel like them, and to help them to find things that they can do together as a group. And they are action-oriented. So building those active citizenship skills I was talking about before is really important. And if they're wanting to take action, support them in whatever they're wanting to do. My colleagues at the Australian Psychological Society and I wrote a little booklet that summarises some of the stuff that I've been saying. There are a few copies here, and I know Kelly's going to send around links for where you can download it from the web. It's getting a little bit old now, but I think most of it still applies pretty well. But then we come back to this idea of action and agency, meaning the capacity to contribute meaningfully. So Hart and his colleagues, on the basis of a lot of work with young people, concluded that developing the skills and having the opportunities to actively contribute to combating climate change can provide important psychological protection, helping young people to feel more in control, more hopeful, and more resilient. Really important things. And of course, we have no better example of somebody taking action than Greta Thunberg, who started her strike, 5 years ago, and showing how the kids of the world were so ready to hear her message. A mere 3 months later, we had 30,000 kids on the streets of Australia, and less than a year after that, we had 6 million kids globally going out and protesting for action to protect their own futures. But there are still people who say, well, should we really let our kids take part in these sorts of actions? Shouldn't they be staying at home and learning their STEM skills and their 3 Rs and so on? Well, to look at that, I did a little study with Marco Bellomo, who is a young climate activist. Well, I guess he's about 25 now, but he was younger when we did this study. where we interviewed a bunch of his colleagues, fellow climate activists from around the world, and published that in a journal, and asking them questions like, you know, how did you get involved? Why did you get involved? How did you feel by getting involved? What's happened since you became involved, and so on. So just 2 quotes from that study from Alice. She says, taking action creates a sense of solidarity, cooperation and productivity in the face of despair. So she talked about how she was very despairing before she started to take action. She says, I've learned how to talk to authority figures like the police and the MPs and so on, to recognise my rights, speak confidently in public and with the media, to communicate non-violently, and how to work effectively in a collective. Really important things for young people to be learning. And Emma says taking action on climate change can be incredibly rewarding and fulfilling, and has certainly built up many of my skills. But they also said, if we're doing this on our own and we don't see adults also doing it, then it's very easy to move into burnout and back into despair, feeling like the whole burden is being put on our shoulders and we're not sure we're going to succeed. So that importance of us being engaged, us modelling is a really important thing. So those skills that Alice and Emma were talking about that they developed through their activism were quite similar to ones that my colleagues again at the Australian Psychological Society and elsewhere, thought about when we were thinking about how do we prepare kids and young people for the big changes they're going to face in their lives. Not only the very likely climate impacts that they'll have to work their way through of disasters and other changes, but also the massive societal changes that do this really fast transition to a zero carbon world. So we wrote that into another little booklet, which you'll also get the link to, and that drew quite a lot on my research on how we can build the positive development of adolescents and young adults. So what we thought of, came to the conclusion was that these are the sorts of skills and capabilities that are going to be really important for the future for kids to cope with the world that's ahead of them. So they came into 3 groups of personal, interpersonal and social and civic. In terms of personal skills, self-regulation, knowing how to manage your own behaviour when you're highly stressed, knowing how to handle your emotions when you're feeling very distressed. The bigger than self values that I've already talked about, being adaptable and resilient, of course, and that covers a lot of territory which I won't go into now. Feeling good about yourself and about your capacity to make change, so good self-esteem and self-efficacy. And having good coping skills, which are focused on the problem and making meaning out of the context you're in, rather than things like denial, avoidance, distraction, or just purely emotion-focused things. In the interpersonal area, cooperation and collaboration, we're really going to have to be working together so much to face the problems that we're going to be facing, both with climate change and with the transition to zero carbon, to try to reduce its severity. So really important, as Alice said, that's some of the skills that she learned through activism. There are going to be lots of sources of conflict, likely to be huge influxes of climate refugees. There's going to be likely shortages of the basics of food, water, arable land, lots of potential for conflict. So kids knowing how to negotiate and resolve conflicts non-violently is going to be really, really important. And then knowing how to build and maintain supportive relationships with your peers, with a friendship group, with family, with teachers, with others, is all in order to support yourself as you're going through difficult times, is really critically important too. And then there's the social and civic skills that often don't get talked about so much, but the importance of being community-minded, being caring about your community, being willing to volunteer, to join up, to help,
knowing how to speak out about things that you feel strongly about, believing that in collective action that together we can make a difference, knowing how to act effectively as a citizen, and then having a global worldview, not just thinking in a more parochial sense about the here and now in the local situation, but looking at what's happening in the world more broadly. And I'm bold enough to say that I think these might be more important than the STEM skills or the STEAM skills that our schools are being told that they should be focusing on. So that's basically the ideas that I was wanting to share with you about how we can be talking to our kids and working with our kids, and what sort of things we can be supporting our kids with as we face this unprecedented time. But of course we also need to be looking after ourselves, because this is a tough time. So we need to be building our own active hope or realistic hope. People who write about hope talk about hope as a verb, not a noun. Hope is a thing that you build through doing, through taking action, rather than it being a passive thing. So we can build our own hope by joining groups to support ourselves, by being with like-minded people, and also because we can be more effective if we're working together. Australian Parents for Climate Action is a great group to look up, and you of course here all have the wonderful GECAN that helped initiated this tonight's session. Groups like this, for me, it's been just so important to be part of my group of GECAN, Darebin Climate Action now, for me to be able to feel like I can actually do something and can contribute. If you are feeling overwhelmed by all of this, seeking support informally through friends and family, but also from experts if you're feeling like you really need to be taking it a bit more seriously with professional help. Psychology for a Safe Climate does fantastic work at helping people deal with their climate distress and anxiety, again, mainly by transforming that into action. I think it's helpful if at the end of every day I can say, well, I've done some little thing to help address the climate. Whether it's encouraging my friends, giving my friends some heat cups to stop them keeping on getting the non-recyclable takeaways, whether it's taking action on, getting more solar panels on the house, whether it's divesting our money from companies that are supporting fossil fuel companies, whatever it is, do some little thing where you can say a tick for yourself at the end of the day, I've done something to help address the climate crisis, and to talk about that with your friends. Today I did this and I'm feeling so much better because I did that. For us all to practice active citizenship, I think we all need to be raising our voices to protect the next generations, and demanding global action at emergency speed and scale, which means, joining protests, writing letters, telling our members of parliament or our mayors or our bosses what we think should be happening, all of those things. And then, of course, looking after ourselves by spending time in nature and having fun, particularly if we are with our kids. And that, I think, is where I'm going to end my formal bits. And what I'd like to do now is to invite our young people up onto the stage so we can have some conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne, for setting us up well, I think, for this next discussion. We'll just get the mics on. Just put those ones already on, and that's slide them up. Okay. So I'd first like to just introduce you to the three wonderful young people that have joined us tonight. So on the far left we have Talia, who's a third-year student at Monash Uni, and she's studying pharmacy. Talia is a member of Glen Eira's Youth Sustainability and Climate Action Group. If you haven't already heard about that group, do feel free to follow up afterwards. And she's passionate about sustainable healthcare, leadership and education. She aspires to increase community awareness of the current climate situation through advocacy and providing accessible education. And in the middle we have Ella Simons, who's a 16-year-old passionate member of our local community here. and from organising the School Strike for Climate protests, representing Australia at the pre-COP event in Milan, to launching a campaign to lower the voting age in federal parliament. Ella's passionate about youth voices and fighting for a better future. So some of us might be wondering, what were we doing when we were 16? We could have been doing things like Ella's doing. And we have Hannah next to Anne, who's also a third-year Monash Uni student, and I gather Hannah and Talia know each other from the past at McKinnon Secondary College as well. Oops, so I'm just bumping things with mine. And Hannah's also a member of the same Glen Eira Climate and Sustainability Action Group, and particularly passionate about environmental communication. They work in advocating for diversity and inclusion at Monash Uni. So I think that's set us up very well, Anne, for you to have a good chat with our students. Over to you.
Thanks, Kelly, and my thanks again to you three young, wonderful people. What I want to ask to begin with is how you reacted to my talk, whether there were any things that resonated particularly with you, or whether there were things you violently disagreed with and you think I've got entirely wrong from your perspectives. Just any observations?
I guess for me, I had never seen it like broken down into that, and it's incredible to see that like now, psychologists have worked together to break this down and to be able to educate parents, because I guess when I became involved in like activist circles and stuff, it was kind of a journey that my parents and I took together, and it wasn't that they knew what they were doing, but it was that we worked together. And so I think to see that there are like resources and that we can now be educating people on how to cope with this is incredible, because for me it's been such a learning journey, and I feel like if I had seen this I could have like known it earlier.
Hannah or Tanya?
I found that really interesting to hear your perspective. Because I science, so it's always that what we study about how should we communicate this to like the young audience. And I really loved what you were talking about, like integrating the children in like day-to-day conversations about environmental issues. Just like packing lunches should be, let's not use plastic, and explaining them why you are maybe taking public transport instead of individual vehicles, and explaining that to them on like a day-to-day basis. And I thought that it's a really great way of creating that mindset that I think moving forward we really need to make that women speak, like having that environment and having the climate at the forefront of our actions, every action we take every day life. I think that's really important. So I really like the point you made there.
Yeah, that's a really nice observation, I think, about bringing it to the front of our minds. One of the members of my group, GECAN, has prepared a t-shirt, and it's been warmer tonight, I've worn it, but it's got a great big elephant in the doorway, and it says the elephant in the room, the climate emergency, and how it is something that's so all-encompassing that we don't necessarily talk about and, relate to our everyday lives. So, yeah.
On that kind of similar point of mindset, I think that what stood out to me most, Anne, about what you said was the change in mindset that you said that 6 to 8 year olds were saying, oh, I want to do more, I want to get more involved. Like when I was 6 or 8 years old, I was thinking about, which toy I could buy next. I wasn't thinking about sustainability. And for me, it's quite motivational and quite empowering to hear that really, really young people are thinking about this. It's also kind of scary in a way, because why are they thinking about this? Isn't this a common problem, for adults or the older generations to deal with? I mean, it's our fault anyways. But so it's kind of scary in a way that they're thinking about it, but it's also quite empowering as well. So I think the change in mindset was definitely something quite interesting that you brought up.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm glad there's nothing you desperately disagreed with me about, although that would have been educational for me too. So I guess I'm interested, and I expect other people would be too, about how and when you first learned about climate change. Was it at home, at school? You said a little bit, Emma, about it, you're learning together. Do you think it was through social media, and do you think you're told enough? So I'm just interested in that, how you became informed.
I guess for me, my passion for climate action and my inspiration was firstly my love for the environment, which was something that was like ingrained in me from such a young age. You know, my family's classic holiday was to go camping every single year, every single summer. That was what we did and what we continue to do. And so it was my love for the environment and my passion for justice in every way that brought me to understanding climate change. I couldn't tell you what age, but Mum was always like, you can't, make sure it goes in the right bin and turn your lights off and have short showers, and the daily habits we have to be and live a bit more sustainably were ingrained in me from a young age. But the school strikes happening in 2018 was, I guess, for me, the thing that really educated me on what climate change was and that this was a global issue. And when the 2019-2020 fires happened, I was on my Jewish youth group camp, and that was the moment for me when I realised that this was on our front steps. We were evacuated from camps in the early mornings. We were woken up by fire alarms at 5 AM. We were told by the leaders to pack our bags. There were a lot of tears on that bus ride home, firstly because we were leaving camp early and no one wants to do that, and secondly because we were realising that these moments are not going to be uncommon and that this is the future we're facing. And I remember getting back from that and I was like, oh my god, what can I do? And my sister and I baked 100 muffins and we had a cupcake stall on Carl Street and we raised over $1,000. And not because our cupcakes were that good, but because people were feeling helpless and they wanted to help in any way they possibly could. And so it was the school strikes that taught me what people power were going to do, and that there were young people, and it wasn't just me feeling this way, and it was caring this way, but it was the 2019-2020 bushfires that brought this to the front of my mind, and that understanding that there was irreversible impacts that were being had on the planet and on our country and within this state, and that really pushed me to becoming more involved and feeling more empowered to take action, because that cupcake stall, whether it was the hundreds of people that walked past on their daily shop while we were wearing masks, not because of COVID, but because there was smoke in the air, that were good job, come on you kids. Lots of kids came and would stand next to us at the cupcake stall, probably there for a couple hours, but realising that okay, this is our future, this is what's going to happen now, we've got to do something about it. Changed the way I saw the world and saw the impact that we could have as young people.
How about Dahlia?
I guess for me, even though I'm studying environmental science now, it's not something that I was always aware of. I think growing up there was a really big lack of education around climate change and environmental issues. I don't remember in primary school, I never really learned about climate change. I was always passionate about the environment. I loved being in nature, so it's always something that I loved. But yeah, in high school, thinking back, it wasn't a big part of our education in climate change. I remember in geography, BC, my teacher actually told me don't use the term global warming in the exam. So because it wasn't officially recognised as part of the curriculum, so I felt there was a really absence in education around climate change. So, but yeah, in high school, pretty much there was an environmental class, and I was like, I like nature, let's join. And I joined from that point of view, and that's when I heard a lot of conversation about climate change, and I was like, oh, why is no one talking about this? And that's when I really started to grow passionate about climate change and learning more about it.
So you learned from the other kids more than from
the
school curriculum. Yeah.
I kind of had a similar experience to Hannah in the sense that we both took BC Geography, had the same teacher, so also heard about global warming thing. So for me, I feel like I was a little bit late to the game, still learning as well. So for me, I was definitely more exposed to climate change and environmental issues through my DC geography studies. And I'm very grateful that I took that subject because it really just opened my eyes to what is actually going on in the world. I'm very much a STEM kid, studying pharmacy, I love my chemistry and bio, but never do we really talk about, you know, the plants or lack of biodiversity. So it's just a very, very different area which I hadn't explored, and it's very interesting for me to do so. I felt as if though I kind of was exposed a little bit into climate change and pollution specifically through travelling. So I was very fortunate that my family took us almost every year travelling to explore new cultures, which is something that's very important to me. And through doing so, you kind of see the way different communities are operating. And I remember going to specific countries and you just see a lot of like pollution on the road, a lot of kind of homelessness as well. And it's something that's quite sad. And you think, wow, it's such a contrast to over here where we live in. So for me, that was also a big wake-up point, I think, travelling and seeing how other cultures as well are living their day-to-day lives. So yeah, I thought that definitely evoked my interest in climate change as well.
I guess I'm interested in how, once you became more aware of the scale of the problems that we're facing, what sort of emotional reactions that you had to that? How did you feel about it, and did you feel able to share those feelings with others? What were the issues there?
I think for me, I don't think I was scared at the beginning. I'm a very stubborn person, I know that. And so I was like, okay, this can't be. Like, nah. Like, things are wrong, but like, something can be done. And I think over time, learning more definitely made me fear it more, but also being part of things gave me hope. Yeah, I don't think that my initial response was fear. Probably because I didn't realise the extent of what the world was facing. Definitely the experiences of evacuating was like, you know, when it really set in, I think, for myself and for lots of people during that fires. I had already connected with School Strike and had friends across the country. One of my close friends, Lou, she had to evacuate from her family up in the Blue Mountains and had come down to Melbourne, her and her sister, leaving their parents up there to fight the fires to protect their family home. And so having friends that were separated from their family, that they didn't know what was happening to their family, friends on the front lines of this crisis, made me feel more worried. But I had these friends because of a movement of young people. And so, yeah, I think it was like, there was a combination of, when I realised how bad it was, I had that fear, but at the beginning I was just like, what's going on? Like, this is so easy, people deal with it. Like,
yeah, I definitely felt that sense of anxiety over the current climate situation and environmental situation. But I think the biggest source of feeling of anxiety was feeling like the lack of inaction and the lack of the sense of urgency amongst our society. And I was learning about climate change, and I was like, this is really big impact. This is going to impact my future generations. And that lack of action by people higher in power. And yeah, I think that's the lack of action when I know that the span of the next decade, that we really have to ramp up our actions, despite the whole lack of sense of urgency amongst the community. That's kind of what sparked anxiety for me, because I know we should be on, I know the earth's sticking behind, we should be doing more. So yeah, that type of sense of urgency was what really did.
Yeah, on a similar note, I think when I kind of first came to learn about what was really happening around the world in regards to sustainability, I felt a little bit helpless and a little bit guilty that I hadn't taken interest sooner. I hadn't, sought out opportunities like I am now to advocate, to learn, that I kind of just sat back and just watched it on the news and what was happening. So I think in terms of how I felt, I just felt a little bit stuck and a little bit powerless. I also thought initially I'm someone who's quite young, I'd like to say, 20 years old. So what exactly can I do? How can I even have an impact? I'm not in the government. I'm, working at a pharmacy. I'm studying at university. How can that translate to making some kind of change in the sustainability sector? So helpless, but I think over time it's translated to more motivation, for sure, which is good.
Excellent, yeah. It's one extra little comment that I wanted to make before, but I forgot, was the term that gets bandied around now, you've probably all heard, it's the term is eco-anxiety, to reflect the reactions that people are having to climate change. I find that a really annoying and limiting term. First of all, we think of anxiety as being a pathology, it's a psychological problem, whereas the reactions we were talking about here are all thoroughly rational reactions to a real problem. So that's one problem. The other thing is, just from what you're saying and what I've been saying about the research, the emotional reactions that people are getting to the climate crisis are so much more than anxiety. They are grief, they are anger, they're frustration, they're hopelessness, they're despair. And so I don't think that gets encompassed in the term eco-anxiety. That's too narrow. So I prefer terms like climate distress as being a way of encompassing the way many of us are feeling. Okay, so I guess the next thing is, so you've talked about how you've learnt about, in different ways, about climate change. What do you think the role of parents is in this, in the current era? Do you think parents should talk to their kids about climate change? And how, from what age? Yeah.
I think for me, my parents were part of my journey to activism and a journey my family took and the people around me, and so I'm grateful that they were there to listen and there to learn with me. I have a 5-year-old brother, so it's been interesting bringing him up and being able to talk about it with him and understand that younger perspective. I have a megaphone hanging up in my room, and he came to the strike that I was lucky enough to help MC on May 21st. And, practice chants in the megaphone with him, screaming, "Stop Adani." Not many 1-year-olds knew that. But he could, the few words he could put together. And so I find it, incredibly inspiring seeing how, little kids respond to things, and how a parent, or anyone around the younger children, these kindergarten teachers, they learn so quickly and adapt so easily, and so creative to the solutions. And so I think parents have a role in just listening, and young people, and especially young kids, I think are the ones that are going to rebel and push the line and have these new ideas. They don't, we don't have the expertise or years of experience, but young people are innately creative and rebellious and will think of things and learn to work together in teams to create the things they care about, and discuss things. So often my brother comes home and he's like, the 5-year-olds have had a full conversation about issues. You're like, how do you even know? Where did this come from? But they do know what's going on, and you walk past a shop and there might be a sign that relates to climate change. The news will be on somewhere, the newspaper at a cafe. This issue is constantly around us. At kindergarten, they're learning about it. The impacts of climate change are affecting us like the bushfires. You can't hide that from kids. And so I think parents have to accept that, this is the future, and we're going to, support that through that, but lean into the creativity of young people and the hope that young people have, because, they're going to think of the cool ideas and have fun with it, because we can.
No, I definitely agree with you. I think, it is important for parents to raise this conversation about climate change with children. I don't think I really had that growing up. My parents didn't really know much, they're not here, so I can say, really know much about it, so it wasn't really a conversation on the table. But I think, especially with these children, the young generation, we're the ones who are going to really experience the harsh impacts of climate change, so I think it's very important to involve them and help build the skills and the resilient mindsets that they need to survive in this world. And yeah, I think like what you were saying, there's definitely a way to talk about it. Like if you just keep talking about like the impact and how bad it is, that could be a very source of stress and feel really overwhelming. But I really liked what you were saying about engaging them in actions and building that sense of empowerment. So yeah, like getting them involved in like composting or small things like that. I think that sense of empowerment and learning through doing actions and making positive impacts is that children respond really well to that.
Yeah, definitely agree with what was said. Yeah, I definitely do think that parents should be talking to children about what's going on in terms of sustainability and the climate change. In terms of age, I mean, I feel like whenever they're ready to absorb the information, you don't want to force it all on them all at once, but when they're ready. I was quite fortunate that my parents, they're quite supportive, and also they would always read the news, read what's happening about sustainability. I'm not just saying that because they're sitting in the audience, they actually did, which was really good. So they would always try and introduce that into conversations with my sister and I found that to be quite helpful. So I think having a very slow, easy kind of introduction, so whether it be dinner time conversations, whether it be, as you said before, Anne, going on nature walks. Like with my family, we went to really nice rural and regional parts of Victoria growing up. And it was great because we got to take a bunch of nature walks. We got to just really embrace the culture, the atmosphere, and just really immerse ourselves in nature, which is something we don't get to do here living in the city. So I think that's definitely a great point and a great way that parents should be, you know, interacting with children and really exposing them to the world that we live in, the beautiful world that we live in. And in addition to that, Anne, I really like the point you made about, in your slideshows, about educating, but also talking about solutions as well. I think that's a really great way to empower young people and also enhance their creative aspects as well.
Thank you. Not sure how we're going with time. One more question. Okay, let's end up with one more. So let's, for my last question, I'll slip in several together. So the question is, do you think kids should take action on climate change, and why? And why do you think many kids are not taking action on climate change? And why are all of us here female? Where are the boys? Why are they here too?
I think if you know what justice is and you know what suffering is, then you're going to be the people to stand up for issues. For me, my great-grandparents all being Holocaust survivors is something that really fuels me to stand up for justice, and I look at the climate emergency as an issue of justice because it is purely not fair that those that have done the least are being impacted the most. And my great-grandfather turned 94 2 days ago, and he is one of my biggest inspirations in fighting for what I believe in, because I think as women on the panel, we all know what it means to stand up for yourself, and to, you know, I've had so many arguments with the boys being like, oh, why'd you care? Like, you know, things will be given easier to them and they'll have a chance to do something because they get given that chance over me. But I know that sometimes it might be harder to be the one to step up, but that you've got to do that. And, you know, the future, we're going to see a future of women taking leadership and women being in power. Hopefully a female Prime Minister once again soon, one day. But I think that on the question of young people standing up, I think we have no choice. I don't blame the generations above me. I blame the people in power in those generations. I do wish that people would have realised this sooner, but I'm also lucky that I've been given the education to understand this issue, and I don't think my parents or my grandparents were taught as much as I've been taught. And I am grateful that I've learned about First Nations history and learned from First Nations people on caring for country and the importance of being connected to land and country, and that's why I feel empowered to take action and empowered to protect, because I know the importance of our country and the importance of connecting to country and land and what the environment means to not just myself, but to the First Nations people of this land, and to the traditional owners of this land. And that it is only right and only fair to stand up for that and protect that, because I have the privilege to. And I think that's what empowers me to. But overall, it has been like the most incredible journey, and I'm connecting with young people across the state, country, and across the world. I feel lucky to have met incredible leaders like Greta when I was in Milan, experiencing that like international front. Just for me showed that like, if you're going to stand up and go talk and just go to that random meeting, and like if your parents encourage your kids to just reach for it, then you can get there and you will get there. And then it's about the energy you put into something that we as young people are going to take those risks and be the leaders we want to see, because if the leaders aren't there, we've got to step up and do it.
That's amazing. Sorry. Okay, that's like it. But yeah, should young people take action on climate change? Yeah, I think, especially if it's something that they're really passionate about, actually, I think it's really important because, you know, climate change, just like going even on my social media, it's always popping up, news, and it's really easy to feel really overwhelmed. And I think it's really important, as you said, to have that outlet. So I think you were talking about how action is like one of the best antidotes. I think you were saying that, and I totally agree. I find that myself doing like climate actions, getting involved in like environmental, like volunteering, all that sort of space, help to channel that sense of like stress over climate change. And yeah, because I study environmental science, so channeling what I'm learning and finding that outlet. So I feel, yeah, if that's something that they're really passionate about and they want to do it, then actually I think that should support people in pursuing that.
And do you have any ideas about why kids aren't doing things around climate, whether it's school strikes or more local things or whatever? Why they're not? And the gender issue? Yeah, why boys are being less prominent in the movement? You don't have to have answers.
Yeah.
I don't think always boys less prominent. I know that school strike has always put the non-men and people, like put non-men and people of colour in the forefront of media, because that's not what's usually seen. But there were a lot of boys, and are a lot of boys that sort of hide things.
Yeah. And like I feel like people that identify non-men are more have more like experience having to like stand up for themselves, so maybe that side of advocacy comes out. But yeah, even I remember when I was at school, it was kind of taboo to talk about climate action. There was a sense of, oh, you're being too political. So when I was part of environmental club, I'd always play it down amongst my friends. It was always like joke, like, oh yeah, Hannah, the environmental. So there was always this a bit of like taboo, like you don't want to be seen as being too political. And so yeah, and a lot of teenagers, they want to look cool and be like, oh, we don't care, sort of vibe. But yeah, I think also just lack of education. It wasn't part of the curriculum, so I think that has a big impact.
Yeah, definitely. Once again, a lot of great points from me. To add on to that, in terms of the first question was, should, I guess, young people or children be taking action? And as Ella said, we don't have a choice. Everyone needs to take action. I think no matter your age, everyone should be involved in this process. I also think that when a young person stands up and kind of highlights an issue, it's quite eye-catching and it's quite interesting, because it's like, oh, they thought of that, why haven't we thought of that? So I think it's a great way to get more people in power really intrigued and kind of motivated to make a change. So that's my hope, at least. And in terms of the how exactly can we really get involved, I think as young people, definitely through volunteering, seeking out opportunities. And I think that a lot of people are scared to seek out these opportunities for a couple of reasons. A, I think lack of confidence, they might be scared that they don't know a lot about it. And I think also B, they don't hear about these opportunities, they don't know how to get involved. And personally, as someone who doesn't come from a background knowing a lot about sustainability, it can be scary, you know, wanting to take action but not knowing how and not having the knowledge to do so. So that's why I'm quite passionate about accessible education, presenting it in a way, whether it be through visual education, through a podcast, presenting it in a really engaging way that speaks volumes to all people, not just people who have knowledge in the sustainability sector. So I think if we can kind of spread the word through different platforms and to different knowledge levels, it'll definitely help get more people involved. And in terms of why I think there are no non-identifying males here today on the panel, I think I definitely agree with what Ella and Hannah have already said, especially in regards to maybe like, yeah, as Hannah, you said about advocacy, like I felt like we've always had to advocate for our rights, whether it be leadership or even the various industries. So maybe that's why we're here today. We just feel a lot stronger about advocacy.
Well, good on you all three for being here today. I'm very grateful.
Thanks very much for finishing on that note, and join me in thanking Ann Sanson discussion. I'll invite up Rick from GECAN, who'll make some closing remarks about GECAN, and we'll extend a few thanks as well.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm also here to make some small redress on the gender imbalance with the schools so far. I must say, Anne, thank you for that presentation. It was wonderful. I'm very glad that it's been recorded so we can revisit it and also share it with people who couldn't be here tonight. And thank you for the three young ladies on the panel. Also to bring your real life experiences to complement what Anne had to say very well. I'm not going to go on because I know we're short of time, but just going to put a plug in for GECAN. As a GECAN member, there are a few of us here tonight. I can see them, Bruce, Catherine and Sally and myself. Yes, we've been around for nearly 4 years, and we've, I think, been pretty effective in a number of campaigns that we've undertaken within Glen Eira, starting with pushing for the declaration of a climate emergency in early 2020, I think I'm right, and the subsequent action plan that Council is embarking upon. So we're going to keep the pressure on to make sure that Council doesn't lose sight of those objectives. We've also been involved in a number of campaigns that are perhaps not so directly involved in climate change, like waste management, campaigning against to reduce single-use plastics use, municipal waste disposal options that Council is wrestling with at the moment, and the Caulfield Racecourse and other areas where the biodiversity and ecology of this area, which is already somewhat diminished over time, are further in need of protection. We'll be outside afterwards, and we're happy to talk to anyone about GECAN. Urge anyone who's interested to talk to us or visit our website or Facebook page, and maybe come and join us.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, and we've just got a few little tokens of our appreciation. Beautiful little posies put together by Catherine from GECAN. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you. I can assure people that it's a sustainable gift, even if they don't wrap them in front of us, and to grab one of those lovely, hand, I'm sure homegrown and carefully put together posies from Catherine. So just on behalf of Council, I'd particularly like to thank those members of GECAN. It's very much been a team effort, everyone doing their different parts of Sally, Rick, Bruce and Belinda as well, who couldn't be here tonight. So do hang around, and you may have more questions. So we'll be out the front if you want a cuppa or something to eat. And tomorrow morning we'll hit you with an email asking you for feedback. We always want to know what you think of the things that we put on and suggestions for ways we can engage people about the climate emergency into the future. And there'll be a recording sent out in the coming weeks, so feel free to pass that on as well. And thanks for your time.